All right, we'll say good morning. Let's begin. Our shir this morning is dedicated by Art Miller in the merit of a refuah shlema for his wife Sherry Shana Rachel Basfreda. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, Sherry will have a complete and enduring refuah. All right, well, so let's begin. So we have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today is Kuf Samech Hey, and remember I told you yesterday we're starting off mamish with an incredibly beautiful Gemara as well. We're starting Kuf Samech, so 165 is today. We're starting off 164b. Kuf Samech Tel Beis. 3 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav. Rav said the following: Shalosh averos ein adam nitzol mehen b'chomer. We'll say there are 3 averos. It's actually a very strong statement. 3 averos from which a person, literally translated, a person is not saved every day. Which we'll say means there are 3 averos that Rav says that a person transgresses each and every day. What are the 3 averos a person transgresses every day? So the Gemara says, Hirhur avera. So what's a Hirhur avera means thought of sin. Now, thought of sin, now what does that mean? Remember again, the good news is, if you think about sinning, it doesn't count. Baruch Hashem. Right? In other words, so if I hear her avera, as opposed, by the way, to hear her mitzvah, thinking about doing a mitzvah, one does get some credit for that. Here avera, one is not held accountable. So it's rather what here avera means is inappropriate or impure thoughts. For impure thoughts, there is accountability. The understanding of Chazal ultimately is that it's impure thoughts that ultimately again lead to impure actions. So obviously it's not the same as committing the avera itself, but there is a level of liability for the thoughts I have. Therefore, the Rav says every single day a person is nichshel and here avera. Iyun tefillah. So we'll say, what's iyun tefillah? Take a look at the Rashbam. The Rashbam says, iyun tefillah, last line of Kuf Samech Tal Ramad Beis. Yesh mefarshim shala'achar she'espal adam belivo she'yisham l'makadosh baruch hu scharo. So there are some who explain that after a person davens, he says to himself, the Rebbeinu Shalom should really grant my tefillah. V'yasach HaKadosh Baruch Hu tzrachav v'yishma tefillah so l'mishe espala b'kavana. So also, iyun tefillah means a person says, I daven with so much kavana, the Rebbeinu Shalom has to grant my prayer. So that's called iyun tefillah. Literally, again, examining one's prayer too closely. A certain level of what we'll call, liturgical entitlement, where a person feels that because they've davened with kavana, therefore, again, they deserve to have their request granted. So we'll say, remember again, I daven with kavana, a person has to daven with kavana, and it's up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu whether he grants the tefillah or not. At the end of the day, that's going to be up to him, and there are many other factors that go into that as well. So a person who's a Bal Gaiva and thinks that because he davened with kavana's tefillah should be answered, that's not avera, that's called iyun tefillah. Tosas has a little bit of a different interpretation. Tosas says, if you look, it's on Tosas iyun tefillah, right in the middle of that Tosas, right after the little vav in parentheses, where Tosas says, V'nira l'Rebbe, the iyun tefillah, shura, shin mechavnim b'tefillah. Tosas says, no, iyun tefillah also means a person who davens without kavana. So according to the Rashbam, it's a person who davens with kavana and therefore expects that his tefillos ultimately will be answered. According to Tosas, it's a person who davens without kavana. Okay? And last one, v'lashon hara. And lashon hara. So I'll say everybody speaks Lashon Hara every single day. Now remember again, the tie-in to this sugya is just Lashon Hara sugyas we had yesterday. So the Gemara says, Lashon Hara sakadayitcha? Really? Is that true? That people speak Lashon Hara every single day? I'll say it's not true. Meaning again, to go through a day without some type of improper thought, it's probably impossible. To go through a day where a person either doesn't daven with kavan according to Tosas, or a person thinks that they're entitled to something because of their tefillos, probably impossible. And a person could go through a day without speaking Lashon Hara, to which the Gemara says, top of Kuf Samechei, Ella, Avak Lashon Hara. And the Gemara says, you're right. You can go through a day not speaking Lashon Hara, but Rabbi say it's almost impossible to avoid Avak Lashon Hara. What does Avak Lashon Hara mean? Look at the Rashbam. Kegon de Amri, Nura be planya be'erchen. So we'll say, the Avak Lashon Hara goes back to our sugya yesterday, where sometimes a person could say something that is potentially positive, but through those positive words, ultimately, again, it opens the door for some type of negative or slanderous type of lashon. So in other words, what the Gemara is saying over here is, it's almost impossible to go through a day not saying something that opens the door to Lashon Hara. That's the Avak Lashon Hara. That ultimately, again, it's not Lashon Hara directly. So he gives the example, by the way, he quotes the Gemara Maseches Erechim, that a person says, Plony so-and-so always has a candle lit in his home. Now, the reason I would be saying that is because to say he's always machnes archim, he's very hospitable. But you could understand ultimately again how that could open the door for, oh yeah, he has so much money, he's so wealthy, and then of course the next statement after that is, why didn't he give so much to the Avas Yisrael charity campaign? It's a little plug over there, right? But you could go ahead and you could open up. You sometimes by saying something seemingly positive, you can go ahead and just open the door for so much negative speech. So we'll say that's avak lashon hara. I'm Rav Yehuda Marav. So we'll say, listen to this. Rav Yehuda, this is amazing Gemara. Rov begezel. We'll say most people steal in some way. Most people steal in some way. Look at the Rashbam. What does it mean, Rov begezel? Rov b'nei adam chashudin ala gezel. Most people are suspect of theft, on theft. Ke'ein gezel shemorin lehatera b'masu v'matan la'akiv ish mirevach haray lo l'chaviro. Now both say, now when the Gemara says most people cheat, what does that mean? Most people steal, I should say, excuse me. Most people steal, both say, more often than not in a business setting. That when a person feels entitled to certain profits, they will cut certain corners, even if ultimately, again, that causes a loss to someone else. Now, again, I both say, the incredible part is, very often it's easy to justify some of those things as business, right? But so obviously sometimes it's business, but other times again it's really not business. Other times again it borders a bit more on unethical or inappropriate business practices, which Chazal call theft. Therefore, again, but because, again, it's so easy to be moreheter, so easy to justify it as, I'm just a tough businessman, so therefore, again, many people are nichshol in it. So actually, it's a very strong warning of rov begezel. Most people, majority of people, engage in some type of what we'll call business-related, or I should say, income-related theft. Umiyot barayos, a significant minority of people engage in immorality. So you have to understand, miyut means minority. But in halacha, the Rishonim bring this down. In halacha, when there's a miyut hamatzoi or miyut she'ena matzoi. Miyut she'ena matzoi means an insignificant minority. In halacha, an insignificant minority doesn't even exist. If a minority is going to be mentioned, it means that it's a miyut hamatzoi. It means that it's a significant minority. So when the Gemara says miyut barayos, it means a significant minority of people engage in immorality. We'll say, so first of all, understand over here what Rav is saying. We'll say is, to a certain degree, just, sometimes we'll say when we make mistakes in life. So sometimes part of the crippling parts of mistakes is thinking that, oh my gosh, I'm such a rasha, no one ever does things like this. And what Rav is saying about statements like this pave the way to tshuva. Because again, rov begezel, okay, most people are nichshel in some type of business-related theft. Miut barayos, a significant minority of people, suffer moral lapses. So, that's not a good thing, but it's a good thing in that if it happens to me, I'm not some abnormal individual. I'm not some aberration. I'm a human being. And as such, again, because this is quote-unquote, this happens, but because it happens, I have the ability to rehabilitate myself. V'akol b'lashon hara. The Gemara says, and everyone speaks lashon hara. So the Gemara says, lashon hara, is that true? Meaning, what bothers the Gemara about this is it's not true. A person could avoid speaking lashon hara, ela avak lashon hara. Rather, again, what it means is, even if a person is able to avoid speaking real lashon hara, it is almost impossible to avoid speaking this avak lashon hara. Fine. Says the Gemara. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, hakol k'minhag HaMedina. So let's remember again, Rav Shimon Gamliel said, in terms of a get pashut or a get mukusher, everything is in accordance with the minhag HaMedina, the law of the land. So the Gemara said, v'tanakamo, less than minhag Medina. And I both say, remember again, the Mishnah was talking about going ahead and making a pashut into a makusher, and a makusher into, or I should say, just a makusher into a pashut, excuse me. So Rav Shimon Gamliel said, everything is in accordance with the laws of the land. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. And the Tanakama doesn't subscribe to that idea? Does the Tanakama not hold of Minhag HaMedina? To which the Gemara says, Rav Ashi, this is what it means to say. But it's actually quite interesting. So the Gemara says the following: Amar Rav Ashi, Ba'asra denehigi pashet, va'amali avid pashet, va'azal avid lemakusher peda. So let's listen to this. If I tell a sofer right? I'm living in a place where we don't write get makusher, gite makusher. Rather, we only go ahead and write a get pashut, a straightforward document. And I tell the sofer, write for me a get pashut. And what happens? The sofer goes ahead and writes a makusher, then kapeder. I will say then the sofer is in violation of my wishes. The sofer is in violation of my wishes, and ultimately, again, the shlichos, the document is void. Good morning, Mr. Schoenfeld. So the Gemara says the following. Next, avidli pashat, go, it's fine. Nigi makusher. So we'll say if I live in a city where the normal custom is to go ahead and write a get makusher. And what happens? Va'amrli avidli makusher. And I tell the sofer, write for me a get makusher. Va'azal avidli pashat. And the sofer goes ahead and writes for me a get pashat. So kapeda, then ultimately what? Then it's clear about say that I was makbid. In other words, if we live in a place where they write a makusher, I told the sofer to write a makusher, and the sofer violates. He does not follow the terms of my request. He's in violation of the agency, and the document is void. So we'll say all the Gemara is saying over here is, if you live in a place where a certain type of document is written, and you ask the sofer to write that certain type of document, that means you are makbid, right? You are makbid. You only want him to execute the agency in that particular way. Keep ligi. So we'll say, where does the argument come up? Ba'asr din higi b'pashat makusher. Where let's say, we'll say, I live in a city where we write both types of documents, a get makusher and a get pashat. V'amrli avidli pashat. And I tell the sofer, write for me a get pashat. And what happens? Va'azal avidli makusher. And instead of, we'll say, what does he do? He writes a makusher. So what's the halacha? Mar savar kpeda. So we'll say ultimately again, the Tanakama says, since I told him to write a pashat, that means what? What do I want? If I tell him to write a pashat, then I want a pashat. Umar savar, mara makom hulo. Rabbi said the other opinion says that lemaisa is just a mara makom. Rabbi say, what? Thank you. What does mara makom mean? We're always siphoning air conditioning from somewhere. Like we're jerry rigging something. So the Gemara says the following. The other opinion says, well, so the other opinion says like this, that if I live in a place where I tell the sofer, if I live in a place, where they write a get makusher and a get pashat. They write both. And I tell the sofer, write a get pashat. So we'll say, the Reb Shimon Gamliel says, what I'm doing is I'm telling the sofer, listen, feel free to execute this agency in the easiest way possible. The easiest way possible is how? Is ultimately, again, a get pashat. But if the sofer chooses to execute the agency in a more complicated fashion and write a get makusher, that's absolutely fine. So we'll say, this is going to be exceptionally important machlokas we're going to build on in just a moment. But here's what we have. See, if I live in a city where it's clear that we only write certain types of documents, so then halacha l'maisa, again, when I tell the sofer to write that document, he's bound to follow that type of agency. However, if I live in a place where ultimately, again, they write both types of documents, and I tell them to write a pashut, then Abba Tanakama says, if he writes a makusher, the agency is void. Rav Shimon Gamliel says, no, if I tell him to write a pashut, it's mara makom. I'll say mara makom is, literally I'm giving him basic instructions. But I give him the right if he wants to complicate the agency and work harder and write a makusher instead of a pashut, that's absolutely fine. Amar Abaye, Rav Shimon Gamliel, Rav Shimon Elazar, kulu svirlu mara makom. So also Abaye says, that Rav Shimon Gamliel, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Elazar all agree, Rabbi say that there are circumstances when you give an agent instructions that you don't mean that the agent has to follow those instructions to the T. Rather, you're just giving the agent a mara makom. We'll say mara makom means you're giving him basic instructions, right? The basic outline of your wishes, but he also has the right to go ahead and execute the agency in a way that is easier or more beneficial to him. What does this mean? For example, the Gemara says, most it means mara makom. Well, this is a very yisodistic machlokes. When the principal gives the shaliach instructions, right? So how do we view those instructions? Are those instructions explicit? Am I saying to the agent, execute the task in the following way, and if you deviate from my instructions, even one iota, so the agency is null and void? Or am I saying, listen, I'm giving you a general framework for the execution of this agency, but giving you some level of, we'll call it agent discretion to figure out how to carry out and execute this agency. So Rabbi is now saying, Reb Shimon and Rabbi Elazar all hold that when you go ahead and you engage an agent, you give him some level of discretion in the execution of the agency. How do we see this? Well, let's listen to this. So the Gemara says, Reb Shimon what's Reb Shimon we just said? That's the case of where I live in a city where they do a pashit and a makusher. I tell him to do a pashit, he does a makusher, the shtar is still fine because I give him the discretion. Next, Reb Shimon, what's Reb Shimon will say? This time, Reb Shimon Omer em hita l'shavach harizum mikudeshes. So Reb Shimon says that, let's say again, a man says to a woman, go ahead and become a kudeshes to me with a silver dinar. And what happens? A woman sends her agent to go ahead, and she says to the agent, be makabel the silver dinar from Ruvain for my kiddushin. And what happens? The agent shows up, and Ruvain gives him a gold dinar. So I say, so the halach is she's still mikudeshes. I should say, Reb Shimon says that she's still mikudeshes. Why? Because Lamai says, as long as the mistake, quote unquote, is to her benefit, then ultimately, again, the kiddushin will still be good. See, even though, again, she told the agent, accept on my behalf the silver coin, he has the ability to say what she meant is accept an item of value, not less than silver. But ultimately, again, if it's gold, it's going to be good as well. What's Rabbi Lazar both say? This nan, listen to this. A woman says to an agent, a woman says to her shaliach, be makabel my get, in Baltimore. And what happens? He's makabel the get in Washington, D.C. So what's the halacha? I will say puzzle. Tanakama says ultimately again the get is puzzle. Rabbi said, why would the get be puzzle? So on the most basic level, because the agent deviated from the terms of the agency. Right? She told him to be makabel the get in Baltimore. He was makabel the get in Washington D.C. So if the Rashbam, by the way, says if you look right to the right on the Rashbam puzzle, shehi eino rotza lehis bayit shel makom acher. But it could very well be that when she says to the agent, accept my get in Baltimore, because it's embarrassing for her to receive the get, she's only willing to have it done in Baltimore, not in Washington, D.C. Therefore, if he goes ahead and he deviates from the terms of the agency, the get is possible. Rabbi Lazar machshir. Rabbi Lazar says no, that ultimately, again, it's kosher. We'll say why. Because Rabbi Lazar holds that when the woman tells the agent, be makabel my get in Baltimore, what is she doing, Rabbi say? She's trying to make it easier on the agent. So you don't have to run around finding my nudnik of a husband. You can find him in Baltimore. But Lamaisa, what she really means is what? Be makabel my get wherever you find my husband. Right? So again, whether it's in Baltimore, wherever it is, but she's trying to make it easier by giving him an address. So the Gemara says, Mar Savrak Peda, Umar Savra Maramakum. But Tanakama holds that when she says Baltimore, she's makbid on Baltimore, versus Rabbi Lazar holds that what? That it's a maramakum. That ultimately, again, she is giving him a general location, but doesn't mean ultimately, again, dafka that location. Fine. So I'll say, so the point of here is, and you see, this is an ongoing dispute in these kinds of cases. When someone appoints an agent and gives the agent instructions, are those instructions ultimately viewed as explicit instructions from which the agent is not permitted to waver, or do we say marab makom? Marab makom also means this is just a general overview, a general set of, like marab makom literally means I'm giving you directions. So you know where to look, you know where to start, but you're not bound by this construct. The fascinating machlokes. So it goes weiter. So let's remember again, the Mishnah then ended by saying the following, that if you have a get pashit, in which there's only one witness, the get is pasul. And if you have a makusher, remember a makusher is supposed to have 3 witnesses. If you have a makusher that has only 2 witnesses, so the document is pasul as well. So the Gemara says, Bishlam a makusher, shek kasev bo shnei idim pasul. So I understand a makusher, right? I understand if you have a makusher that has 2 edim, let me see differently. I understand the Mishnah's need to teach me that if you have a makusher that has 2 edim, the get is pasul. Why? Because we'll say, I would have thought that if a makusher only has 2 witnesses, I could have made the argument that what? That the makusher should be what? Should still be kosher. Why, Rabbi Osai? Because under normal circumstances, 2 witnesses on a document are machshir the document. So I would have said, as much as a makusher normally needs 3, but b'diavad if you have 2, it should still be kosher. Kamash malon, no. Kamash malon that lamaisa, again, if a makusher only has 2 witnesses, the document is pasul. Ela pasha shakasavo edach pshita. But we'll say, if you have a get pashit, right, a regular document, a regular document that ultimately, again, only has one witness in it, the Rabbi say it's pashut that the document is pasul. Why is it pashut, Rabbi say? Why pashut? Because you have one witness. There's no such thing as any document that's going to be valid with one witness. So why does the Mishnah have to say that? Rabbi, listen to this. Lo nitzracha da'afilu eid echad b'ksav ve'eid echad b'peh. Oh, Rabbi say, listen to this. So Rabbi says, what's the case? Rabbi says, Rabbi say, the case ultimately is where you have one witness in writing and one witness who is willing to verbally testify that the document ultimately is authentic. Take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Rabbi lo nitzracha lemisni eid echad b'pashat pasel ela hechad dekemesayela eid echad ba'al peh va'asam asnisin lashmo'inon dov samchinon ashtar litrof milakuchos deshne eidim aksurim b'shtarhu demafgile lekala ve'enu ela kimil va'al peh v'tarfa b'bnei chorin kedin hamalves chavera be'edim below shtar. So we'll say, listen to this. So halacha l'mais, what Abai is suggesting is the following. The Mishnah is coming to teach me that if you have a document, Rabbi said, that has one witness signed on it, and one witness ultimately, again, verbally of testifying that the document is valid. So Abai says, Rabbi say, such a document will be valid. In other words, it upholds the transaction, but if you're, let's say it's a loan document, the lender cannot collect from the chasim mishubadim, cannot collect from properties that the borrower has sold since the date of the transaction. What's the reason for that, Rabbi say? Because the only time that a lender could collect from sold properties is when the loan was recorded in a document. Because the document has a call, it generates a noise, generates a publicity about the transaction. Therefore, the person who purchases the property is going to realize that he's purchasing encumbered properties. But that call is only generated when you have two witnesses who sign on the document. If you only have one witness who signs and one witness who's verbally attesting to the transaction, then that does not generate the call. Doesn't generate the call. So Rabbi say, Abai is saying the chiddush of the Mishnah is Rabbi say that's what? That even if you go ahead and you have a document and you have one witness who one witness who signs on it, one witness who goes ahead and verbally testifies as to the authenticity of the document. So the loan, Rabbi say, the transaction is upheld, but with such a document like that, you cannot collect from the chasim mishubadim. Ameimar, so the Gemara says, Ameimar, achshe be'eid echad, b'ksav be'eid echad apeh. Amem Rabosai held that a document that has one witness signed on it and one witness testifying balpeh, right? One witness giving verbal testimony about it. Ultimately, Amemar says such a document is a valid document. Look at the Rashbam. Amemar achsha be'edecha b'ksav u'ksav yodo mekuyim mimakom acher be'edim ve'edecha nami balpeh masid al samalva v'nebein delegamri machshir afi lutrof milakuchos. So we'll say Amemar. So now, after Abai just finished saying his piece, the Gemara says, by the way, Amemar argues, and Amemar says that if you have a document, with one witness signed and another witness giving verbal testimony about the authenticity of the transaction, Amemar says that is a bona fide transaction, and the lender could even collect from encumbered properties. So Rashi said to Amemar, so Rashi says to Amemar, what do you do with Abai's opinion? Abai said that such a document is not a valid. In other words, the transaction stands, but you can't collect from the chasim mishubadim. So Amalei lo shmieli. So Meimar said, "Oh, I never heard Abai's opinion." To which the Gemara said, what that means is kolomar lo svirali. So what Meimar was really saying was, I've heard it, I just don't agree with it. Ella kashya masnisin. But I will say ultimately again. So what do we do with the Mishnah? So remember again, the Mishnah said that lamaisa, if you have a pashet, if you have a get pashet, and you only have one witness signed on it, so the document is going to be possible. To which the Gemara says, Masnisin kamash malon tishnayim b'makosher ke'eid echad b'pashat. I will say rather what it's teaching us is the following: that two witnesses on a makosher are like having one witness on a pashat. What does that mean? Mahasam psula d'oraisa. I will say just like Lamaisa, if you have only one witness. Just like if you have only one witness on a get pashat, so the document is pasal mid da'oraisa. I will say so over here. What da'oraisa means is clearly the document is invalid. So just like we know that for Doraisa you need two witnesses. So we'll say just like if you have a get, if you have a document that only has one witness, that document is Pasuma Doraisa. So too again, if you have a get Makusher that only has two witnesses, is Pasuma Doraisa. Obviously, that statement is not literal because a get Makusher is a Dirabanan. Rather, what it means is the same way that a get Pashat that only has one witness, ultimately again is inherently invalid. So to a get makusher that only has two witnesses is inherently invalid as well. Teida, the sholchu mitam. So let's listen to this. No, they sent from there Chavaria l'Rabbi Yirmiyah. So we'll say, so the friends of Rabbi Yirmiyah sent him the following question. The Rabbi will say, now listen to this. Why isn't Rabbi Yirmiyah in the base medrash? So if you look at the Rashbam says it's right across. Teda the Shalchulei, v'Shalchulahu the Mitzarf and the Shalchulei Cham Rabbi Yirmiyah. The Basra da'afkom ve'Yujosha. So we'll say they went ahead and they threw Rabbi Yirmiyah out of the base medrash. Kedar parak lo yachbar. Afkul Rabbi Yirmiyah mebei midrasha va'aldo ailu kitamin maskan. But remember again, we actually learned this earlier, that there was a series of different questions that Rabbi Yirmiyah was asking, that the other Rabbanim were felt he was being a little bit of a nudnik. You know, we'll say there are two different ways that people ask questions, and there are more, but for our purposes. So sometimes a person wants to ask a question because they want the answer. Sometimes a person likes to ask a question because they like to hear themselves talk. They like to ask a question. They want to chepper. They want to chepper. So both say, so this wasn't Rabbi Yirmiyah's intent, but it's where Rabbi Yirmiyah came across. He came across ultimately again as cheppering with the questions, and as a result, they asked him to leave. Asked him to leave the base medrash. But it just, you should know, it's an interesting yesod in general, how, and this is true in educational realities as well, which is the needs of the collective always outweigh the need of the individual. So sometimes if the individual is just a nudnik, and the individual is just distracting, and the questions just are irrelevant and derailing, and just are taking away from the learning dynamic of the others, so sometimes that person just has to be extricated. Not chas v'shalom discarded, but extricated just a bit in order to allow the rest of the learning dynamic to continue. An important yesod. In any event, that's what it means, shalchu mitam. They sent Rabbi Yirmiyah, right? Rabbi Yirmiyah was kicked out of the base medrash, right? But yet, interestingly enough, they still continued to communicate with him. Right? They still continue to speak with him. Now we're going to see the good news. Don't worry. The story ends happily. Rabbi Yirmiyah comes back in. We're going to see that in just a little bit. So the Gemara says the following. They sent him the following question. So the Gemara says, so what was the question? What happens? So ask Rabbi Yirmiyah this question. Let's say you have a document. There's one witness who's signed on the document, and there's another witness who's verbally testifying to the authenticity of the document. Mahu sheyitztarfu. Both said, do these two witnesses have the ability to combine? So the Gemara says, Aliba de Tanakama Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, lo tiboy lecha. So according to the Tanakama Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, there's no kasha. Why not? Dafilu shnayim biksav ushnayim alpeh lo mitztarfim. So both said, Tanakama according to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha holds that even if you have two witnesses who are signed, or meaning who have signed, let's say on two different ways, or two witnesses ultimately, are both giving verbal testimony, they cannot combine. So I'll say if they can't combine when they're either both in print, this one I said they sign at two different times, let's say, or they're both giving verbal testimony. If they can't combine in that case, then it's clear that they can't combine when one is giving testimony in writing and one is giving testimony verbally. So where does the question come up? I'll leave with Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha. According to Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, what does Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha say? Because he says, Shnayim b'ksav u'shnayim al peh hu d'mitztarfi. Because what Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha holds, that if you have two witnesses in writing, where Rabbi Yeshua said this witness is signed independently, they could combine. Or two witnesses are giving verbal testimony, they could combine. So when do we say that, the Gemara says? Do we say Shnayim b'ksav u'shnayim al peh hu d'mitztarfi, aval echad b'ksav ve'echad al peh lo mitztarfinun? Do we say, Rabbi said that it's only if both are in writing, or if both are giving verbal testimony that they could combine? But if one is in writing and one is giving verbal testimony, they can't combine. Or Dilma Loshna, or perhaps Rabbi say there is no distinction. Perhaps again they have the ability to combine no matter what. So the Gemara says Shalach Lahu. So also listen to this. Rabbi Yirmiyah gives a very self-effacing, humble answer. He says Amar Lahu, Shalach Lahu, Ani Eini kedesh shalachtem li. I am not worthy that you are sending your questions to me. Ela kach das talmidchem nota. But if you want to know my opinion, right, the opinion of your student is as follows. Sheyitztarfu. I do believe that the witnesses have the ability to combine, and that halacha l'maaseh, if you have one witness in print and one witness giving, meaning signed, and one witness giving verbal testimony, that they should be able to combine to form a testimonial unit. Amrle, anon haki masanin alei. So both say, so there's a different version of this exchange. The friends of Rabbi Yirmiyah sent him the following question: Shnaim sheidu. If two people give testimony regarding a certain matter, echad bebezdin zeh, ve'echad bebezdin ve'echad bebezdin zeh, ma'u she'avo bezdin etzel bezdin v'yitztarfu. So let's say if you have individuals who went ahead and let's say gave testimony in front of 3 batei din. Do the judges of the batei din have the ability to combine and ultimately again uphold the testimony? To which the Gemara says, Aliba de Tanakama Rabbi Nassan Loti Bailacha. So according to the Tanakama Rabbi Nassan, there's no question. Tafilu Bichad Bezdin Nami Lamitztarfi. It won't work about so why? Because even witnesses who give individual testimony in front of the same Bezdin cannot be combined to form a testimonial unit. Elakiti Bailacha. So where does the question come up? Aliba de Rabbi Nassan. So according to Rabbi Nassan, do we say it's only when the witnesses give their testimony in one beis din that they have the ability to combine to form a testimonial unit? But in 2 different batei din, the witnesses can't combine to form a testimonial unit. Or perhaps again there is no distinction. And Rabbi Yirmiyah sent back to them, the truth is, I am not worthy that you should send me this type of question. But here is the opinion of your student, Sheyitztarfu. I believe that ultimately, again, they should combine to form a testimonial unit. Fine. Mar Barchia Amar Haki Shalchule. They both say, so it was just different versions of the question that they sent to Rabbi Yirmiyah. So Mar Barchia says, this is what they sent. Shnayim Sheidu Bebeis Din Zeh. I will say, if you have 2 witnesses who testified in this beis din, then they go and they testify in a second beis din. And then both say the unwritten pieces, they go and they testify in a third beis din as well. So they've effectively testified in 3 different, same 2 witnesses testified in 3 batei din. Mahu sheyavo echad mikol beis din v'yitztarfu. We'll say here this interesting shaila. So let's say same 2 witnesses, Reuven and Shimon, testified in beis din testified in beis din Aleph, beis din Gimel. So we'll say here's the following kasha: can you have one judge from each of those batei din essentially join together and form a beis din to uphold the testimony that was heard by the 2 witnesses? So each one of those judges in their own respective batei din heard this testimony. Can they come and form a beis din to uphold that which was testified before them? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Nassan Loti Bailacha. So what's the current Rabbi Nassan? It's not a kasha. Why? Hashta edim etzarfen dayonim boy. Because both if Rabbi Nassan holds that witnesses can combine, certainly judges can combine. Elakiti Bailacha. So where does the kasha come up? Aliba de Tanakam Rabbi Nassan. The kasha comes up also according to Tanakam Rabbi Nassan. How so? Because edim hu d'lo mitzarfinon. It's witnesses who don't combine about their mitzarfinon. Both say first wide line, but judges should combine. Or perhaps again we don't make any such distinction. So Shalach Lu again Rabbi Yirmiyah sends to them, Ani eini kedai shatem shalachtem li. I am not worthy that you sent me this question. Elo kach das talmidchem nota. But if you're asking, so this is the opinion of your student Sheyitztarfu. That ultimately, again, I hold that the judges should combine to be able to form a beis din, ultimately to uphold the testimony. Ravina says, Haki shalchulei. This was the question they sent to Rabbi Yirmiyah. Listen, these are really interesting cases. 3 people go ahead. So 3 people went ahead and a beis din got together for kiyum shtaros. Right? They want to certify the asharta, the henpick. They want to go ahead and certify the document. So what happens? Umeis echa mehen. So both say after this process, after they certified it, but before they had the opportunity to write up the certification, one of the judges died. So what's the halacha? The Gemara says, tzrichi lemichtav. So when writing the certification, so we'll see, here's the interesting shayla, when writing the certification, does that written certification have to reflect that at the time of the writing of the certification, one of the judges had died? In other words, the ikra was that he was alive during the certification process itself. Now they just have to write the document. Does the written document have to reflect the death of one of the judges or not? So the Gemara says, tzrichi lemechtav, do they have to write b'mosav tlasa havina v'chad les havi? Olo, do they have to write, we started this process with 3, but now we are only 2? Or do they not have to write that? To which the Gemara Shalach lu Rabbi Yirmiyah said, Ani eini kedash atem shalachtem li. I am not worthy that you sent me this question. Ella kach das tamid chanota. But this is my opinion. The opinion of your student is shetzrichen lemichtav, that they have to write the following. B'mosav tlas havina. We ultimately again we certify this document in the presence of 3 judges. V'chad les have, and one is no longer. So they must reflect in this kiyum shtaros that what? That one of the judges died at the time or before the time of the writing of the opinion, or the writing of the certification. Bosai va'aldo, and it was a result ultimately again of this episode, iluha l'Rabbi Yirmiyah be'midrasha, that they took Rabbi Yirmiyah back into the base medrash. Now look at the Rashbam. Aldo iluhu sheheshiv lahem. Both say it's about 7 lines up from before it gets wide in the Rashbam. Al da'i luha sheheshiv lahem kehogen, because it was Rabbi Yirmiyah answered in an appropriate way. Da dafkua sheshal shelo kehogen raglo achos chut l'tchum v'raglo achas b'socha tchum v'al dafkum b'midrasha berklo yachbar v'hashtahu dailu. So we'll say they brought him back. Meaning they felt that the reason he was kicked out was because they felt that some of his questions were asked with a little bit of an arrogance, and when they now saw his self-effacing behavior, when they saw his more humble behavior, ultimately again they felt that he should be allowed back into the base medrash. So I suggest you should know halacha l'maisa, the way we paskin is like a meimar, right? Namely, again, they're about to say if you have a document and you have 2 witnesses on that document, but one of those witnesses ultimately again is bichsav. One of them is in writing, and one of them is Baal Peh. Those 2 witnesses have the ability to form together as a testimonial unit, and the Maisa will be machshir, they will validate the shtar. And I will say, to the point that what? To the point that halacha l'maisa, even with such a shtar, the lender will be able to collect from the chasim mishubadim. He will be permitted to collect ultimately again from encumbered properties. Fine. Well, so let's begin the Mishnah. Another fascinating sugya. Kasav bo zuzin me'abos. And now here we're going to get into a shtar that has essentially contradictory statements. That's the issue over here. The shtar says different things that seem to be inherently contradictory. So watch this. Kasav bo zuzin me'a di'inun slo'in esrin. So let's say a person writes in the shtar, I lent Ruvain 100 zuz. There are 20 sela. Now both say 20 sela is in fact 80 zuz, not 100 zuz. So essentially, I have two different amounts recorded in the shtar. So one amount is 100 zuz, or I should say one amount is 100 zuz, and one amount is 80 zuz. So which one ultimately again is the amount that I go with? To which the Gemara says, "Ein lo elo esrin zuzin." Both say we go with the lower amount, and therefore the document, right? I only have a claim of 80 zuz. So what the Mishnah seems to be saying is, whenever you have contradictory amounts in the shtar, we always go with the lower amount. Meya di'inon tlasin slan. So I'll say similarly again. If I say that he owes me 100 zuz, which is 30 slan. So we'll say 30 slan is in fact 120 zuz. So once again, I have contradictory amounts. Is it 100? Is it 120? Ein lo elamana. I only have a claim for 100. Kasev zuzin. So we'll say so again. So principle number 1 is that whenever you have contradictory amounts, you always go with the lower amount. That's number 1. Next, kasev zuzin di'inon. Well, so listen to this. Let's say in the document it says, Ruvain owes me kesef zuzin, di'inon, that are, now after that word di'inon, you normally have the amount filled in. Only one issue over here in this document, which is what? Which is that amount is erased, or that amount is illegible. So what do I do in a case where it says kesef zuzi di'inon, but the amount is not there? V'nem chaki was erased. Ein pachos mishtayim. So we'll say, I know at least that what? He owes me 2 kesef zuzin. Right? Why? Because zuzin is plural. The minimum plural is 2. Kesef Sloin di Inon, V'neim Chak, Ein Pachos Yishayim. Similarly, again, if it says Kesef Sloin, right, he owes me silver sloin, and again, the amount is erased, he owes me at least 2 silver sloin. Darkonos di Inon, he owes me Darkonos, right, in the document it says, he owes me the Darkonos in the amount of, and again, it's erased, V'neim Chak, Ein Pachos Mishtayim. So we'll discuss why we need all of these examples, but the bottom line of Abosai is what? Whenever it says that he owes me monies, but the amount ultimately is either illegible or erased, so the minimum amount of monies means what? 2 of the type of currency mentioned in the Mishnah. Kasav bo milamala mana umilamata masay. Abosai is interesting. Let's say again, as we will see, the amount that is owed is often written twice in the document. It's written in the beginning of the document and towards the end of the document. But let's say in the beginning of the document it says that I lent Ruvain $1,000, and in the bottom of the document it says that I lent Ruvain $2,000. So now which one is it? So the Gemara says, or milamala masay milamata mana. On the top it says I lent him $2,000, on the bottom it says I lent him $1,000. The idea being is what? Is that the document records 2 different loan amounts. So we'll say, what do I do in that circumstance? What's that halacha? Hakol holech achar hatachton. And we'll say in a document, everything goes after the last number. So when we have a contradiction in amounts, what we look at, the guiding light, is going to be the last amount mentioned in the shtar. That is going to be the binding amount. The Gemara says, if that's the case, we'll say if that's the case, that the binding amount ultimately again is the second one and not the first one. So why even write the first one? Because even though again the second time that we'll call it the bottom amount that's listed is the authoritative amount, but it's kind of like a little bit of a fail-safe. In case something happens to the first amount that is blotted out or it gets erased, at least you could always go back to the first amount mentioned in the shtar. Alright, so we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up in Mirat Hashem with the Gemara tomorrow morning. Shkoyach.